So Arush,
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Eco and Finance Cluster, and we will be hosting our roundtable for the month of December. And my name is Arush. I will be moderating this roundtable. We currently have two panelists with us for this roundtable. We have Vasu and we have Surarihan. Thank you guys for participating. And let's get into it. The topic for this month's roundtable is: Are the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund doing enough to help develop countries? And we think this is a very important topic because we are entering into an increasingly multipolar world. And with this shift in power dynamics, it's not very clear who occupies the hegemony in the global power diaspora right now. So I think the questions are very important, and the answers that our panelists give would be even more important. So the first question to start off with is, given the current criticisms of the existing voting arrangement, do you think the World Bank and IMF should strive for a more equitable decision-making system? Anyone?
Okay, I'll go first. Okay. See, so if you actually ask me regarding this question, I would certainly say that we need more equitable and more practical voting arrangements. In the current situation, if you see the if you see the voting pattern itself, it is predominantly dominated by the Western countries, and to call out certain names, I would say US and most of the European countries, US and most of the Western allies. So they mostly dominate the voting patterns. And also, if you could also see the the voting arrangements by itself, due to fear of any kind of an action from US, that fear itself actually makes countries to vote for like vote for an option which actually US is supporting. So like moving forward, where Asian countries such as India and China are expected to dominate the economic sphere, I would certainly say that we need more of an equitable voting arrangement with all countries um, having having a good amount of say in the voting process.
Uh, I'd like to add to that. I agree with what Vasu says, but we can criticize the current voting arrangement on, the lack of reflective, it, it lacks the reflective changing economic background which the world is going through. So, to quote an example to substantiate that, we could, just take into account the Russia-Ukraine war, which took place. So that kind of had an imbalance in the economic sphere which the world had, and then there was a temporary shift of the world towards who it would align to, or would not. But then again, it again goes back to what uh, Arush initially said, the hegemonic framework which has been set forth. So, and there are a lot of things which we need to take into account while, giving an opinion on, how we should be taking that vote, the setting of votes into account, because primarily what we observe in India specifically, the votes do not reflect the current opinion of the people. Unofficially, it is there are other factors which also play into account while how and why people vote for a particular setting, and which in, impacts their decision making. So, the legitimacy and the credibility of these votes also has to be challenged and is a matter of discussion, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Hi, Aryan. Would you like to add something?
Uh, I like all the points that were put forth by Suryaran and are very valid. I think I would add on that including more like the say of the East Asian countries and the developing countries into the voting would be a little bit more inclusive of IMF and World Bank, because those are the places which has the potential to command the global economy in the coming future with their presence increasing. I would say that these countries need a better and equitable representation and voting rights in the processes that happen.
Thank you guys for your answers. Very interesting takes. We will move on to the second question, which is it important for the World Bank and IMF to engage with NGOs and the private sector to improve the efficacy of their development projects?
Yes. So
No,
answering to this question. Okay, so Surani,
no,
you can go. Yes, yes. Go ahead.
no, Vasu, go ahead, please.
Okay, I'll go. Okay, so speaking of this question, like yeah, until now, like until 2023, the World Bank and IMF they have been partnering with NGOs. The only question would be the extent to which the impact which they have been creating. They have been partnering with NGOs in taking projects in countries such as in the African region, or even in countries such as India. The only thing which I would like to add is that they have to ensure that they go full on, and they partner with more amount of NGOs, and they create a huge amount of tangible impact. Normally, we see the World Bank and IMF partnering with the state governments and the central governments, but to create a create an impact in the grassroots level, and to ensure that the projects are implemented on the right time. So I would certainly say that instead of partnering with the state governments and then going through the processes, they could like essentially they could start collaborating with NGOs to ensure that they create impact at a faster rate when partnering with governments.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I like Vasu's take on how the question is presented, but here I'd like to differ a bit, and how the question we're tending to answer in this roundtable right now is quite vast and diverse to be addressed under a common subheading. So I think we should try and break it down into a bit into a few simpler steps. And I would like to do that by firstly trying to I will introduce what what role, one of the many roles which IMF and the World Bank plays in engaging with the private sector and the NGOs, where the umbrella question stands that whether it should engage or shouldn't. It should, because IMF and the World Bank are two organizations having immense support and looked up upon by various nations, be it a superpower or not. So they stand on a platform which is applauded with a lot of credibility, and their support towards NGOs or organization of the private sector enhances the focus which is given to that particular organization or sphere, so on and so forth. So here right now, what I would like to argue is mere engagement of the IMF and the World Bank should not be limited to the disbursements of funds or any other monetary field, but more so on a much deeper level, which also includes social and environmental responsibility which it shares along with them. And what we observe is the expertise of these worldly organization in risk mitigation is much more than these private or these NGOs which might be located in a sector which might or might not be isolated, is much more. So apart from the monetary framework, risk mitigation and engagement in environmental and social mobility is also important, which I'd like to suggest to a part of this question.
all the points are very valid and very inclusive of all the ideas that are there. I would just like to add on that there should be an equitable participation of the country's local government and private sector and NGOs, because if not, there might be the question might come upon the impact of the sovereignty of that country if too much power is given to too much of the fund distribution is done through the NGOs or private sector. An equitable distribution, equitable working pattern between the local governments and the NGOs would be a good pathway to set an example of how private sector along with the local government are doing a better work at grassroots level and in the country as per se.
Thank you guys for your answers. Let's go a little deeper into this question. There's a very interesting part of this roundtable, which is the third question, which is how can the World Bank and the IMF take local nuances of culture and customs into account while carrying out their projects? I think this would be a very important question to answer because this is something I have observed a lot. Not a lot of people would really take into account when looking at a global organization like the IMF.
Okay, so like to address this, we'll just take an example of India, if we could speak about. So India is a culturally driven country, and it has a lot of diversification and faiths, beliefs, and practices, which all of which necessarily does not coincide, and in some cases it does counter each other as well. So, to bring in sustainability and, an environment which could be inclusive for the IMF and the World Bank to work upon, it needs to take into account the cultural sentiments which kind of overpower decision making in the Indian sphere, because they are driven by a sense of sentiment and culture. So, understanding those culture and customs make it much more easier for these organizations to introduce measures and practices which they would want to, but might or might not, due to reasons might hurt cultural sentiments in the way they are introducing it. So they could frame it in a way and safeguard the sentiments of the populace, to make those measures much more welcoming by the Indian crowd.
Yes, so even I would like to add on to what Suresh said. According to me, for any program or any initiative like which an institutions and such as IMF or the World Bank undertakes, the studying the cultural values is among the basic steps which multilateral organizations such as World Bank or IMF must do. And also, we have seen so many examples of brands facing severe backlash for undertaking marketing campaigns or selling products by not completely studying the cultural values or sentiments of that particular country. And speaking from this perspective, I would also say that any project that work well in countries in countries situated in Africa, if you undertake that same project in India, that wouldn't be received very well. So, as a part of a basic steps, where as a part of a basic step, institutions such as the World Bank or IMF must study the cultural values of that country to ensure that project is something which is received very well from the citizens of the country.
Aryan, do you have anything to add?
Not really. All the points have been quite well covered by both of you. Okay.
All right, then let's move on to the fourth question, which is how do we address the rising debt burdens of developing nations around the world? And do you think that loans that are given out by the IMF help countries or hurt them?
So the debt issue is quite a huge problem for developing countries. They to work with IMF and the World Bank is quite a risky situation because the loans that are provided by them, uh, there is a question whether these loans are being used for the purpose it has been issued for. I would say that if the country should use those funds adequately to address the core issues of a country, like for India, when Indian states for example have a huge debt issues. Um, Quite a lot of states are very much dependent on the welfare schemes around welfare politics and welfare issues. All these funds have been distributed in that sector. The debt issue is a very important question, and it helps in these loans are crucial to meet the uh, working of a country, but it induces a debt trap, I would say, where while taking loan to repay loans, that to avoid would be a very crucial step to be taken by the developing countries. Yeah, that's
Like in my opinion, not totally, aligning with what Aryan said, but honestly, in my opinion, debt initially is created to, mobilize the economy in the first place. It's a method of credit creation. So, like having loan taken for another loan just, does not necessarily reduce the debt. It just transforms it into another one. There are different transformations, a high interest loan to a low interest loan, or whatever what it may be. Uh, Not going into how the money or the debt is used in, the is used by the debt holder. I I'm honestly of the opinion that the debt should be tackled in a way that it could be restructured to benefit both the parties here. Just one of the best ways a person, a layman thinks I could repay a loan is just take another loan from someone else and give it back to that person. But that doesn't work because at the end of the day, the amount which you are willing to pay, that the amount outstanding in a particular economy remains the same. Whereas, restructuring those debts can be a very effective framework, which a country or an economy could go about, to benefit its economic structure. Where if I might go into restructuring, what I mean by restructuring debt a little bit more, we could, extend time limits, break up the debt into different parts. So it is an organized sphere, or we could break it up into small sectors of debt which can be utilized, some can be forgiven. So there are different ways we could go about restructuring the debt which could benefit us either ways. But and it also gets our name, because we have a credibility to keep up. So, breaking this down just, lessens up the debt burden on the economy at the very end. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to add on to what Suryan and Aryan said. So according to my perspective, I would say that if debt can help a country survive, and if if debt can actually change the country's fortunes, I would certainly support it. if to take an example, even India approached IMF in the year 1991, and IMF actually helped India, in creating the by even giving policy recommendations, and by also helping India through credit. And India is a shining example of, when India took debt, it ensured that it actually made the best possible use of the debt, and it ensured that it came out of the 1991 crisis. And the one program which the Indian government had taken at that time was the LPG reforms. So that was due to the pressure from the IMF, so that the credit would be released. So if I could take an example of India, I would certainly say that if debt is something which can help a country survive and change its fortunes, definitely debt is something which I would support. But we have countries such as Pakistan, Nepal, or even Sri Lanka. They approach IMF. They have approached IMF for so many times. Like in the past 15 to 16 years, they have approached the IMF for more than 20 times. That is something which must be certainly avoided. So it actually depends on a case by case situation. So this was the only thing which I wanted to add.
Moving on to the final question of this roundtable. This is something Surarihan touched upon briefly as well. The question is, what role should the World Bank and IMF play in encouraging green initiatives? And do you think the existing policies can be altered to accommodate these green initiatives?
Honestly, like I would like to begin with this because I've mentioned this before. Uh, Green initiatives, again, this goes back to, I think, our second question, which we answered in this roundtable. So private sectors and as well as NGOs and other organizations who work in this sphere play a crucial role in how they conduct their business. Now, just for example, if a very vague example, uh, the poor people, if they're not given an LPG cylinder, they'll burn wood or coal to make to use that as fuel. So you know that harms the environment in the long run by by the necessary geographic things which we are aware about. So it again comes down to what the support and the monetary gains which an economy goes under. So while assessing this question, we need to question the poverty ratios which govern the country, which go around the country, and that too, like uh, honestly, quite surprisingly, this is in India which we see this poverty and wealth is sector stricken, or to put it more blatantly, there it is area wise, it's localized. In a particular city, you'll see that the south of that city is totally poverty stricken, or it's very lives below the poverty line, the standard of living is low, and like that. Whereas if you see, maybe let's take south of every city, as we can assume, the south of every city appears to be the most posh location of that city, if we can say. So it's more localized. So so it's being localized is not a state or a nation problem. It is the distribution of funds. Again, we cannot go about preaching about equitable distribution in every sphere which we talk about, because if a particular sector or a particular industry is well funded, we just giving it an equitable distribution doesn't make much of a difference. But if we transfer few funds from that sector which is very well funded to a sector which is just barely being able to breathe at this sector, that would help to normalize those two sectors comparatively. So you know to everything boils down to what the disbursement of funds and how the IMF and the World Bank engages with these sectors to give them the breathing space and the leeway to explore options which are safe for Mother Earth to protect the environment eventually. Yeah.
Vasu, would you like to add to that?
Suraryan already covered all the points. So just to share my own my own thoughts, I think like if you could read the news in the recent past, I have actually seen the Asian Development Bank and the de development banks of Germany or even France doing more in promoting green green environment or green initiatives. So speaking of that, I should I should say that the World Bank and IMF must learn from all these institutions, and they must play a greater role in supporting all green initiatives. And speaking of India's perspective, I would say that India is the founding member of the International Solar Alliance, which was formed with France. So the ISA, or the International Solar Alliance, was also formed to reap the benefits of solar energy. So that is a path which India has been taking, and India has been an example to the world. So these were my points.
Aryan, is there anything you'd like to add?
Points have been welcome.
All right. So that brings us to the end of this roundtable. I sincerely, I really enjoyed this roundtable, and I feel there are a lot of takeaways from this discussion that we've had so far, and there's a lot to read about as well. I hope all the panelists found this roundtable to be a lot of fun, and I hope all the viewers found this discussion to be very fruitful. Thank you very much.